Superstat listeners. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Dr. Boudreaux Nelson, and I am here today with the esteemed Dr. Rodney Rohde, Dr. Rodney E. Rohde from Texas State University. And we are going to talk about an amazing project that we worked on together and tease it a little bit because it is being released later next year or this year, really.
Or this year, probably, right?
This year. And it's for you. It's for the listeners. It's for the laboratory medicine community, pathology community. And so, first of all, I just want to say welcome, Dr. Rohde, to Superstat. Would you like to introduce yourself to the listeners?
Yeah, sure. Just a little bit. All right. So, hi, everybody. I'm super excited to be here. And it's been an amazing journey working with Dr. Nelson on this particular project, which we'll talk about in a minute. But I'm at Texas State University. It's hard to believe, but this fall will be my 25th year at Texas State University. Prior to that, I spent a decade in public health and worked at the Texas Department of Health and CDC for a bit, and then jumped over into academia and Regents Professor and Chair now of the Medical Lab Science program here at Texas State. So love everything about that part of my world because students are part of my life and education for future generations and all that good stuff. So thanks for having me on. I'm pumped about this project we've been working on.
I know I am too. And you didn't talk too much about your background. A lot of microbiology.
My credentials are specialist in microbiology and virology. I don't think that's available anymore with ASCP, but I'm one of the few specialists in virology. Also got a specialist in molecular diagnostics. So all that work that I mentioned that I guess I didn't mention, but for a decade, I was buried in public health laboratories. So I started out in newborn screens, which was really cool because it wasn't my background. Learned all about hemoglobinopathies and PKU testing and all the things around genetic testing for newborns in the state of Texas. And then I jumped over into virus isolation, which was amazing because it was every possible human virus that might be impacting the public. So we would get specimens from hospitals and outbreak specimens and things like that. Did that for a year or so. And then ultimately I landed in zoonotic control, which is rabies arbovirus. So that's really where I spent about 7 years doing outbreak investigations, worked at CDC for a couple of stints, and was just an amazing time. I was on the inaugural team for the oral rabies vaccine project, which you may have heard about, and it was the first of its kind in the U.S. We eliminated canine rabies. So half of the time I was in the lab providing all the molecular testing for variants and genotyping. The other half, I was going out into the field and delivering through airplanes recombinant vaccine to wildlife to immunize coyotes and fox and things like that. It was super cool. Loved it. It's actually hard to leave, but coming into Texas State and doing academic work allowed me to dive into research around rabies and other types of pathogens. And I still would volunteer and get out there. So public health microbiology, as you know, Melody, is super important. It's part of the medical laboratory framework. And most of the time I'm telling people there's really, there's no disconnect between a hospital laboratory and a public health laboratory other than the types of things you're doing, but ultimately you're helping patients, saving lives, all that good stuff.
Exactly right. And so when we talk about how we got started on this project, we ran into each other at a conference. That's why you should go to conferences. You can watch our conference breakdown episodes if you'd like. If you're going back through the Superstat, past episodes.
Networking at conferences is probably of course, the continuing education is amazing.
Yeah, exactly.
But the networking piece and finding new friends and new colleagues is just probably the best bang for your buck, at least for me. I mean, over the years that I've been going to different conferences, I have friends like you probably all over the country, if not the world. And that's pretty cool stuff when you're getting to know people from all over the country.
Yeah. And even you'll meet people, I find you go to a conference and you'll meet someone who's like, oh, I've read one of your papers or something random. And you're like, oh, cool. Neat. Somebody actually read my stuff.
Yeah. Somebody knows what I'm doing. Yeah, very
exactly. Cool. And you've read their papers, which is even cooler.
Exactly.
So we met and we were kind of talking. And those of you who follow the podcast know we've talked about storytelling a lot on the podcast and the importance of that. And so Dr. Rohde and I were just chatting about it. And if you didn't know, it's been over 5 years since COVID. You can believe it.
That's difficult to believe, isn't it?
It is.
Every time I think about it, and it's actually interesting right now because in the last week and a half, my world's kind of blown up over cyclospora, which you've probably seen, but it kind of brought me back a little bit of almost like a little bit of PTSD, right? It was like I was so busy during COVID with interviews. I was Texas State's primary media contact for COVID, and it was nuts, right? We've talked about this. The book talks about it. I mean, sometimes 5, 6, 7 interviews a day for weeks at a time. And so while I wasn't in the trenches in a hospital like some of you were, I was getting slammed with interview requests and article requests and so on and so forth. And it kind of almost went away. I mean, I still would have the sporadic interview, but the last 2 weeks I've been pretty busy again, doing several a day. And, it's kind of like all of a sudden I feel like, oh, I better check my inbox a little more often because the university's asking me for information and things like that. So,
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. It's all big. So I'm like in the state of Kansas right now. So like it's all big in Kansas. Cyclospora is everywhere.
yeah,
Everybody's
the diarrhea lettuce, right? Watch out
Yep.
for the
Oh
diarrhea.
yeah. Well, and they like Taylor Farms is like suing the FDA. The FDA
Yeah,
I get to apologize. Oh, it's
it's a
getting
mess,
dark over
literal
here.
and figurative. All right, it's a
But
mess.
if you caught it, Dr. Rudy kind of teased what it is. So as we were talking about storytelling and COVID-19, we came upon this idea of what if we did tell our stories about COVID-19? That's a side of lab medicine and pathology, like where we were just completely inundated. And you see a lot on TV about the providers and the nurses,
Right,
but maybe not so much about the laboratory divisions and what we were doing and really had the pandemic on our backs in a lot of ways in terms of developing of assays, doing all the testing and the research
right,
and rolling testing out and all of these types of things in collaboration with public health and the government. And like, what if we did that? Right. What if
right.
we like did a call for those types of stories? And so we got with a publisher.
You did.
Publisher like was like, yeah, sounds like a good idea, which was like super exciting.
It
And then
was. I
we
remember when we first started talking about it, you obviously had some ideas because you had been thinking about it. I had been thinking about it for years. I just hadn't really put it together. I had started journaling. I think we talked about that. I started journaling during the pandemic because it was just I knew at some point I might want to come back to everything that had kind of happened. And it's so many things went down, right? From the beginning to the middle to the somewhat end of the pandemic. And it's just so easy to forget all of that. I mean, even now it's sometimes right. Like even talking about it right now, it's hard to believe it's in over 5 years ago. It just flew by. But that storytelling piece, right? That ability to impact the country and other people, not just our professionals. We certainly can't wait for our friends and colleagues in the laboratory medicine world to read these stories, but other people, right? Like, what did you do? Like, why was it such a big deal? And why do you think it was so important to be a part of that? So that's the part that I'm excited about. And as we talked about many times, feel a responsibility, kind of an accountability to our friends and colleagues that worked their tails off, and lost friends, lost family, lost time, time with their children, time with their workers, everything. It was just traumatic kind of thinking back to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think as we were developing this book idea and working and like did an open call for narratives, and so people submitted narratives, and then as
Right.
we were the editors, and so kind of how that works is like we read everybody's pieces that they submitted, we selected the ones that we thought made the most sense and fit kind of the goal of this first book. So yeah, and we think about COVID took something from all of us, right? And as we were the editors, we talked about this a lot. And as editors, we read everybody's story. So we did an open call for narratives. We had some invited narratives and an open call. And we read through all of those and decided which ones we felt fit what we were trying to accomplish with this first book. Maybe there'll be another one. Who knows?
Maybe. Yeah, maybe so.
Maybe so. But like when we started, we really wanted to portray like the amount of lift, right, that's involved, but then also the humanity and how you get up and go to work every day with all of the things that are still going on in your daily life, which could be the death of a family member or could be
Right.
the loss of your spouse's job or your kids are suddenly home or we have individuals who are having babies, right,
Right.
and working in the lab. And so all of these kind of things that make us uniquely human in the healthcare space, we really wanted to highlight that.
Yeah. And it's as Melody mentions, what we tried to do was we tried to go into it with a, somewhat of an idea of let's take all these narratives. We just did an open call for narratives and let them kind of give them some guidelines, right? But let them kind of be creative. And then what we tried to do is we tried to put the book together in a way that would have some thematic sections, I guess you might say. But really, I think you would agree. I think what we ultimately wanted was kind of a coffee table book where people could pick it up, whether it's my grandparents or your cousins or someone who doesn't even know us, and can open it to whatever chapter. Oh, this looks interesting. This is one about, maybe from a state public health lab perspective, or a hospital laboratory, or someone working in industry, or what have you, and all different types of things. Because like you said, we had them share their little bit more personal stories. Maybe some are more personal than others, I think, just depending on people's comfort. But I think you're going to see some themes when you read this book about what we were going through, and what we were struggling with on any given day, about whatever that was, whatever that was. But you'll see some commonalities, I think, throughout the book.
Absolutely. I think even when we were reading some of them, because how we, our style of editing, we would
Right.
one of us would read them and we would just kind of listen and take it in. And there were times when we were getting choked up reading them
Yeah.
because it was
Yeah.
triggering emotions and
It is.
recall in our own, in our own scenarios. And
Absolutely.
obviously we want this to be kind of cathartic, right, for the
Yes.
laboratory medicine community, but also a way to share with anybody that
The world.
kind of
Yeah.
what you did, and because I don't think any story will be, I mean, obviously there's uniquely personal stories, but I think as a whole, you'll see this is what I did. I either was doing
Right.
testing or I was developing testing or,
Right.
leading a swab station or whatever else.
Right on. And so many of our professional colleagues, and you don't realize that. I mean, you got to think back, right? Kind of crank back the clock and remember, at the beginning, nobody knew what was going on. So, it wasn't just an easy transition. We had to suddenly adapt to this new novel virus. We had to think about, okay, where do we get the testing from? You might remember that kind of all the way back to the beginning when CDC released those certain testing platforms. We had some issues with that. So we kind of talk about that and how people all of a sudden had to kind of get creative, and then manufacturing came in, supply chain issues. I mean, all this stuff kind of comes rumbling back when you think about it. And then you might even remember how I think everyone, and probably across the spectrum, felt very loved, right? We had this love from the community, kind of healthcare heroes. And I think that's true throughout the pandemic, but there was kind of a dip after a while where you might have felt, man, I'm killing myself working 12 days in a row, 12-hour shifts. I mean, I had alumni doing that. And so, you had this kind of, we're essential, but we're kind of invisible, right? Which is something we always battle in our profession and we're trying to be better about. And that's what this book's about. It's for you. It's for the laboratory professional, wherever you work, to kind of hopefully tell this story and for you to share. Maybe it's a gift, at Christmas if it's out. Maybe it's something you give to your employees if they're all laboratory professionals. I mean, I'm thinking about doing something like that where I buy multiple copies and give to my faculty and staff, and maybe special alumni types of events where I can give them this book. So I hope it's kind of utilized in that way so people can kind of take a peek at our world. It's just so complex and so crazy and so busy during that time.
Yeah, and I like how you highlighted the areas. We tried to really select narratives across
Right.
the country to show different takes and different
Regional
environments,
takes. Yeah.
regional takes, because some were different with their public health settings than others. And then also just roles too. We looked for
Right.
diversity in roles. So there's a section on leaders and a section on, new in the profession. And I think those
Right.
are very different. We forget that we had a new workforce, baby techs, as we like to
Right.
call them, right? Stepping into a pandemic environment. And I couldn't even
Right.
imagine doing that as an early career
I know.
professional.
As you know, one of the stories was from one of my alumni who I will not mention right now, but yeah, I mean, I can. So it's weird. It was kind of interesting for me because I was teaching. I was an educator during COVID, so we were trying to pivot to that, right? It was crazy. And so that class of 2020, looking back, they missed a little bit. They missed out on some clinical rotations. They missed out on graduation, and they got dumped right in the middle of a pandemic, and really literally had to learn on the job, and maybe not without as much support as a typical new employee. So those perspectives, I think, will be really interesting for so many new professionals that kind of lived through that early part of the pandemic.
Yeah, we had a great, and we won't spoil the whole book. We had a great
Yeah. Little
narrative when they
teasers here,
talked about
teasers here and there.
Yeah, not saying that who didn't see their coworkers' full faces for almost a year
Yes,
when they started
yes,
working, they were new to their job, like, it's such a it was such a crazy time.
it really was.
And what we do is so technical, and I think that the narratives do a good job of, like, giving a perception of, like, the individual's perception of what we're doing, right? It is routine, but it's not routine because it's in the set of a pandemic. And I do hear what you're saying about, we were healthcare heroes, kind of, right? But because we got a little bit of high there, and then there was that New York Times article,
Right,
"No One Sees Us," which really highlighted, really the backdrop of the book and was part of the
right.
inspiration for the book, because that started the conversation and got some national media attention around what the lab is doing during this time. But it ebbs and flows, right? And I still think, like, I mean, if you watch The Pit, I don't know if you watch The Pit, but they do a lot of stuff about like COVID and like that's like PTSD for people and everything
Right.
it is, but it's also for like the lab people too, right? It wasn't just the physicians and it wasn't just the nurses. And there was radiology and it was
Yeah,
lab and it was, we need
the
more
whole
of these
spectrum.
specialties to like speak out about what they went through too.
Yeah, for sure. I think if I was, personally thinking about big lessons or big themes, that's one of them, right? Is just kind of this ongoing issue for laboratory professionals. And other professionals feel this as well at some time, depending on what they're doing. But I think laboratory medicine, I think everybody in the profession truly understands that challenge. And it is a challenge. And while we're talking about this topic, one of the goals that I had when we were putting this together was to use this book as a platform to try to beat that down a little bit, right? I mean, it's an opportunity for our professionals to be cathartic in what they went through and to share that personal story and to also educate the public about just how critical our profession is, so we know this, right? But if someone else watches this podcast and they're not a laboratory professional, they may not realize that every laboratory result you get, whether it's your annual screen or when you have a sore throat, is coming from us. Those results are coming from us, and you may not ever really realize that, because you're having a conversation with your physician or with a pharmacist or a physical therapist, and they get to talk to you and you get to know them a little bit, and if nothing else, you get to put a face to a profession. But you probably don't run into us unless you know one of us as a family member, or maybe you had a blood draw and you ran into a medical lab professional. So yeah, it's an opportunity as well, right, for us to educate the public, but also to be very proud of what we did during that time. Because I think what I'm really interested in is how history will kind of play this out. I'm right in the middle of finishing a book called Pandemic. Go figure. This is what I do in my part time, my spare time. I'm listening to an audiobook, and it's all the histories of pandemics. And the book was published like in 2017. So there's no mention of COVID except for the original SARS and MERS. And so I'm sitting there going, like you said, maybe there's another book coming. Maybe there's another chance for us to talk about this, because history will judge everything from what we're talking about to all of the misinformation issues to the supply chain issues, a lot of lessons that we learned around kind of how to hopefully not repeat these mistakes again. So that's what I'm excited about, because every time the older I get, I'm thinking about what will people think about what we did, and even for me, what I did. How will my family in the future, how will my children or grandchildren look back and maybe listen to this or read this and go, huh, that's kind of interesting. I didn't know grandpa did that, right? I mean, it's just an opportunity, I think, to kind of talk about that.
Yeah, and I think it's also an opportunity to dispel the myth of like we just push buttons,
Right,
right? There's this
right,
idea that you're not really a scientist, or
right.
or like what
You're
you're just
not you're not seeing patients, you're not
right,
doing
yeah.
surgery. Yeah,
And that's just fundamentally like that's not what we're doing on a daily basis. Every
right.
specimen is a patient, and we know that. And I think,
Absolutely.
that's what I loved about some of the narratives is you could just feel the weight of responsibility in
Yep,
them, and that I felt daily. Just this is not this one result affects a lot, right? We got
yeah,
to get this test right. We got to be able to do this at scale. And how do we do that? And there's a lot of critical thinking and
yeah.
science and just bench work
And
that
all the
we're
and
doing.
all of a sudden, how do we explain to the world about language, the language of the
Yes.
laboratory, right? What's a
Yes.
what's a CT value in a and a qPCR assay. I mean, we know what that is, but try telling that to your sister who suddenly is PCR positive for COVID. They're panicking, they're freaking out. And so at some level, you have to be able to explain this really complex science to people that don't have the background. And so I think COVID really brought to the forefront what we do. And I just hope that we can maintain that momentum. I think we've had a little bit of ebb and flow, as you say, and I'm hoping that our profession and new professionals that continue to join our field, because again, this book could be part of a recruiting strategy. I know you guys are all about that with your podcast and some of the other books you've done for little ones and children. And so we need future amazing medical lab science and just medical laboratory professionals in general, wherever they're sitting.
It's so funny. Like when we were doing this, I had the conversation. They asked us like, what do we think that the publisher, I should be specific, asked like, where do you think this book would be used?
Right.
Like if you were teaching, like would it be in what kind of classes? And then as I was mulling over that, I was like, it could really be used in an ethics class.
Absolutely.
Of like the decisions that people had to make. And was this like a fair situation and balanced situation for all members of staff and for the healthcare profession just in general, not even the lab medicine community. But it's just
Yeah, it makes
interesting how you could break this apart.
Definitely could be an ethics class. I even think within the MLS curriculum, we don't have a lot of space
Hmm.
because there's so much to learn, but maybe in a kind of a problems or a case study type of section of maybe laboratory management or something like that. But my other side of my world is public health, and it certainly will fit into a public health class that you might be examining outbreaks or pandemics or whatever you're going to deal with, whether it's mistakes or things we did right or lessons we learned and all that good stuff. So absolutely could be used in that way. But probably, I think the core of it, I hope it's a way for our professionals to share what they've done and continue the conversation. Like maybe it's a gift, maybe it's a, hey, I bought this and I'm going to let you borrow it. This is what I did. Like this is what we did for 3 or 4 or 5 years, and we
Yeah.
still doing it. It's just not a pandemic at the moment, at least at that level. But every time something happens, the public is expecting results, and they're expecting them right now. And that doesn't happen by chance. You have to have experts and scientists and people that know what they're doing to bring all of that right. I mean, I even think about validating assays, which was a thing, right, that kind of came out in the book. We know what that is, but an opportunity to share with friends and family and strangers, like you don't just get test results because they happen. You have to validate that test. You have to set it up. You have to make sure it's working. And it's every single day you're standardizing and making sure that thing is valid, because if it's not, we're giving poor information to the physician and ultimately to you. So I just think it's a huge, colorful storybook, to let people kind of see what we do.
You highlighted the questioning results because I came up a couple of times, even in my own community, of like, well, I don't believe the test result. And it's like, you have no idea what we're doing right
Right.
now to make sure that that's accurate. Like,
Yes,
it's hard not to be emotional,
it is. It
but
is.
yeah. And now the social media trend is the Netflix documentary. Sit down. So who knows? Maybe we'll have a
Yeah,
COVID-19 lab professional Netflix documentary one day.
that would be cool. That would be cool. Kind of a
That'd be super.
documentary that dove into all these areas. What a great idea that would be.
Yeah. And I think, again, we talk about a lot on this podcast. And I know, Dr. Rohde, you talk about this as well. Like, we have to get outside of our four walls. And
Oh, big time.
I think we spend a lot of time trauma bonding with each other over COVID-19 and what we went through. But we have to talk about it so people understand what we do and where we were.
We absolutely do. And I know you know this, but we talk about it all the time. And you just did it. So
Yeah.
congratulations. So Dr. Nelson just went to a conference that's a little different, right? You went to
It was a
London
lot
for
different.
the
Yeah. Yeah.
Alzheimer's, right?
Yeah. Alzheimer's Association International
So,
Conference.
talking to different people, and it's still kind of medicine and healthcare, but definitely different, I think, than most of the conferences we go to. And so that's what I'm thinking about is doing, whether it's talking about just this particular major for a college student, or talking about my experiences with COVID or rabies or anything else, is taking that to a nursing conference, or taking that to an educators conference, or speaking at your local PTA,
Yeah.
or something like that, just to share with people what we do, because it is interesting and really I think really has a cool aspect to it if you present it in the right way. And I know our organizations like ASCP and ACLS, I'm a member of ASM and APHL. Those organizations have a lot of resources, if you're trying to think about how do we create like a little cool session for 8-year-olds versus high school kids or versus college students, so there are some tried and true types of toolboxes toolkits to kind of do that stuff, because it's hard to think them up on your own. So if you're out there kind of thinking about this, tap into your professional orgs and to your colleagues that are doing this, because there are some great resources for us to use. And hopefully this book will be one, right?
Yeah, and we should
Very
probably
soon.
say the title of the book,
Yeah,
which
I guess
will
we
be
should. I guess we
so
should.
the title is Emergent, which we like that title because obviously
Yes,
COVID was emergent.
it
Emergent
was.
stories from laboratory professionals in the COVID-19 pandemic. And so we are super excited that it will be released later this year. We
Yeah,
got confirmation last week that it's
it's in
going to
production.
print. It's in production. Oh my gosh. And so we are just over the moon
Well, yeah.
that this will be available for everyone and you can share it with a friend and hopefully feel seen when you read it.
Yes.
And by
We
knowing,
really tried, and I know our authors did as well, but we really tried to frame it for you to be seen. So, feel free to let us know
yeah,
once it comes out. If you read it, maybe we'll show up together on another panel or a podcast to talk about it. But we did our very best, I think, to try to get different perspectives and different stories. And it's never, we were talking before we started. It's never easy to get a perfect book or a perfect project, but we hope we represented a great majority of the experiences out there. And certainly we realize there may be more. So perhaps there's a future book.
yeah, which would be amazing.
Yes.
But anyway, when it comes out, obviously, we'll get it all over social so you guys will know. But you guys get a special teaser and to
Yes.
kind of hear from us, the editors. And thank you, Dr. Rohde, for being
Thank
here
you, Dr.
with
Nelson.
me and for partnering with me on this project because
It's
this is a
been
lot of work.
fun. It's been fun. We'll be doing more stuff. Plus we get to hang out at conferences
This
and
is true.
so and meet more people, right?
Yeah,
So don't
come
be
to a
afraid to come meet us and talk to us and get out there and do your own thing. Share your own expertise.
That's exactly right. You can come to a conference and meet us in person. We're pretty chill people.
Absolutely.
So anyway, we thank you guys for tuning in. Always, as always, stay super. Bye.